I had a really comfortable chair in my kind of studio room office, and my son stole it off us, and I ended up with the most uncomfortable £10 plastic IKEA chair you could possibly imagine.
I'm very familiar with that process. Yeah.
He stole my comfy chair. But the problem with my comfy chair is that it kept on going down by itself, and it was very squeaky, so I wasn't that bothered about getting rid of it.
Yeah.
But the hard plastic chair was becoming a little bit too uncomfortable, so I finally upgraded my chair, which is my exciting piece of news for the week.
Fantastic. What a week, eh? Man.
Indeed.
So, good week. You've been away. You've had a week off with the family.
It was awesome. Just over in Coniston.
Yeah.
In the Lake District.
Nice.
And just 5 nights away with the family.
Lovely.
And it was just stunning weather. Absolutely gorgeous, 20, 23, 24 degrees every day, which in the UK, that's pretty hot.
Yeah.
That's comfortably warm.
It's very pleasant.
It doesn't often get much past that. I'm not sure what that is in big numbers.
I can't remember now. This is continuing on from the metric conversation, isn't it? Let's get into Fahrenheit and Celsius. No, maybe not.
It was just a lovely bit of kind of wind down time with the family.
Nice.
Just out on the lake and got a little blow up dinghy boat thing and just having a bit of potter around.
Lovely.
Rowing around the lake and trying not to die.
Nice part of the world, the Lake District. It's anybody gets the chance to pay a visit. It is, and surprisingly, depending on the time of year you go, you can get away from all the crowds because obviously it's a very popular part of the country in the Lake District. But
I think the lakes seems busier than it really is because it's so. All the roads are like really tiny, windy little roads, and all the towns are basically tiny little villages,
Tiny little villages.
So they seem really busy, but really it's not until you get yourself out on like the lakes themselves, and you can have an entire shoreline to yourself on bits of various lakes and things. So
yeah, it
may seem very busy in the towns, but once you get out there, it's not really. So, yes, very enjoyable. Beautiful part of the world. And what you've been up to?
Same old. I'm still stuck in a room. I'm actually moved on to painting now. But a lot of, as I'm discovering, when you spray in somebody's home, there's an awful lot of sheeting up, masking off required. And I hadn't really appreciated in the previous room that I'd done. The walls and the woodwork were all the same colour and finish, whereas in this one, the walls and the woodwork are the same colour but a different finish. So you've got to remask everything off when you change finishes, which is a bit of a chore. It took me about 3 hours to do the changeover. Just sheeting up. The actual painting is really fast, but
well, I suppose that's it. It's getting that crossover of prep time versus the actual painting time, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes. There'll be a long, if not series of videos on this. But yeah, it's interesting. The finish you get is fantastic. But again, this is starting like a bit of a weather report, because I know when we first started the podcast, we were in the throes of the beast from the east, this Arctic blast, Siberian weather, and now it's this last week in London. It's been incredibly humid. And of course, because of the overspray, the dusting, the misting, call it what you will, the fine paint particles that you get in the air, which then have to settle, I've got the whole room sealed off. So, and then because I'm using water-based paints, it's very humid in there anyway. So, of course, everything's taking forever to dry. So it's all taking a bit longer than I'd hoped. I really had expected to be out of there today. I'd expected to finish the painting and to be putting on the last few little bits and pieces. Because I've got a workshop full of that big bunket
yes.
that I've painted, and is obviously occupying the whole workshop more or less. So I'm itching to get that out of there so I can get on with the next thing. But the paint just isn't drying, so that's today's challenge.
There's something quite nice about getting to the end of a job and getting everything cleared out your workshop.
Yes.
And just getting to that stage where you can do a bit of a tidy up, get everything back to the way you like it, and you've got your workshop to yourself again until the next project.
I've got a topic on that. I don't know if we want to talk about that a little bit down the line or whatever. But yeah, you're familiar with the Kubler-Ross change curve. Of course you are. It's also known as the 5 stages of grief or tragedy, where you go through denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance, irrespective of our upbringing, our race, our colour, our religion, anything. All humans go through these 5 stages of emotion whenever they get into some kind of cataclysmic event, sort of family tragedy, whatever it is. Not to start with a downer. Anyway, I thought it was quite fun to do maybe a carpenter's change curve and how that relates to a job. But we can pick that up later if you like.
That would be a big topic.
It's not that long, actually. I can rattle through it fairly fast. But I think that we have other pressing matters to discuss.
GDPR. Yeah, hold on. I'm looking at the show notes here, and it says GPRS.
No, I put that in for fun because I knew you'd miss it.
Yeah. Thanks for that.
GDPR, General Data Protection Register. I kind of think we ought to discuss it a little bit because it's been a big thing. If you're in the EU, you will have been inundated by emails from people saying, hey, we've updated our privacy policy. And it's all to do with GDPR. And now, not to blow our own trumpet at all, but if you go back to, I think it was episode 4, the pick of the week there was a podcast by A16Z, Andreessen Horowitz, clever techie guys in America. But that particular show, that podcast, was all about GDPR and how companies need to gear up for it. So, this has been in the planning for a couple of years and all happened on May the 25th last week. And it's produced, a lot of headless chicken moments for a lot of people. We've had a chat about this on Twitter, and we've had an awful lot of information about it. And the short answer seems to be that if you run a website of any kind, you've got to have a privacy policy. You've got to have something up there which states clearly what you're doing with people's data. Now, you or I, my website certainly, both for my carpentry business and for my YouTube channel, they're just there as kind of an online catalogue, really. I think yours is probably the same. So I'm not really collecting anything. And yet, when I started digging into this, my ISP, my hosting service, the guys who host my website, actually do collect data from people. They for analytics. And I didn't even know they did this. And their solution to this is you can switch off analytics, and that's it. Basically, that's the easy option. So I've cut all that out. Apparently, and I don't know why they do this, but they record obviously the number of visits, but also IP addresses. I suppose it might be useful for to see where people are coming from, to see where people are visiting the site from.
Yeah, exactly. It's just for your geo-targeting of geo analysis of where users are in the world, and so that you know who's listening to you, across the planet, where they're from. So basically,
the fact that I didn't even know that was happening suggests how frequently I've checked that data. So I basically switched all that off. And if you switch all that off, and if the data, there's a very simple, very easy 5-minute self-assessment survey that you can do. It's on the ICO website. We'll put a link to all this stuff in the show notes. And you can assess whether you are required to register or not. And the short answer is, if you're just collecting data for the core use of your business, so somebody sends you an email, it is perfectly reasonable for you then to keep that email in order to respond to them. Yeah. So that's the kind of core usage that they're talking about. If you're not harvesting people's emails to do scummy marketing messages at them or all that, or you're not selling them on, you don't have to register. You don't have to pay them a fee. You basically don't have to do anything other than be transparent about your privacy policy, and you put your privacy policy, your privacy statement on your website. And if you do a quick Google search, there are loads of, I just did a Google for boilerplate GDPR privacy statement, and there's a whole bunch of them turned up. I picked one that's been put out there by a British media consultant, and it's freely available. Again, we'll put a link in the show notes to all of these. And you just take that and you adapt it to your own usage. I've put a little extra in there that covers my usage of email. Again, I'm not harvesting emails. It's just purely for business communication. Somebody sends me an email, there is implied consent that you can add that email to an address book in order to use it. Again, you say where it's stored. Well, it's stored on Apple's and Google's servers, and that seems to be the extent of your requirement for compliance, as far as I can tell, for a one-man band like me, probably like you as well, who doesn't do anything with the information other than use it for the core business functions, invoicing, job tracking, communication, that kind of thing.
So how have you managed to come up with a meaningful data retention policy that's GDPR compliant?
It's stated, as I say, it's in the privacy statement, the privacy policy, that that data is used for. I should have had a copy to hand, shouldn't I? Really? No, it's on my phone. I don't want to start reading out big chunks of it because it's it'll be the most boring podcast you've ever listened to. But it is. Okay, collection and processing of data to deliver your core services, e.g. fulfill orders, can continue unchanged, but if you need to use historical data for marketing purposes, you need consent, basically. But you can say within your privacy statement that you'll continue to use that data until consent is withdrawn or until you presume it's no longer relevant. So if you don't get the job that somebody has asked you to inquire to provide an estimate for, then you can remove their email addresses or whatever else. And that seems to be it. I mean, I know you can dig deeply into this and tie yourself in knots about it.
I've been getting lost in many discussion threads on the internet.
Yeah.
Where someone will ask a very, very simple question about it, and then suddenly there's 150 different replies as to what you're supposed to do. And my big problem with it is that the guidance out there at the moment as to what you need to do to be GDPR compliant is next to useless. It's so vague and it's so open to interpretation. Now, don't get us wrong. I totally get the point of... I agree with the premise of GDPR for big companies holding your data who do naughty things with your data. I totally get that. Mm-hmm. My problem is that they've not made it clear at all what your one-man band sole trader has to do to be GDPR compliant. So, for example, under GDPR, you have a right to be forgotten. Yep. So technically, any customer at any time... Well, and there's a right to look at the data that you hold about a customer as well. So they have a right to say, tell me everything that you hold about me, every personal bit of information. Yep. For the vast majority of small businesses, those 2 points alone, I think, will be almost impossible to be compliant on. Because if you imagine every way that a customer can get in touch with you, because it doesn't just cover websites, it covers any data that you hold about an EU citizen has to be GDPR compliant. It doesn't matter how that data came in, although that's open to interpretation. A lot of people are focusing on the web side of things, but what if you don't have a website and people only get in touch by email? And I've asked this question on the forums, and they've said, well, you
put your policy statement, your privacy policy, as a link in your email signature.
Where to? If you haven't got a website,
you put it in Dropbox. You put it somewhere. You put it in Dropbox. You put it in whatever, Google Drive.
Yeah, but this is the thing that so many small businesses and sole traders, they don't have any of that. They don't.
Well, they need to get their stuff together.
Yeah, but even if they did,
who doesn't have access to Dropbox or a Google Drive?
Oh, plenty people.
Now, if you've got a Gmail email address, and so many people do, you've got access to Google Drive.
I would say 90% of people with a Gmail address don't even know what Google Drive is.
I agree. But if you're running a business, it behooves you to actually find this stuff out. I don't disagree. I think many small one-man band businesses will look at this and think, well, yeah, whatever. You know, I don't understand it, so I'm not going to do anything. Nobody cares. A bit like the previous British one that we had. I can't even remember the name of it. The data compliance thing, which everybody ignored.
The Data Protection Act.
That's the one, yes.
Yeah, but the key difference with the Data Protection Act is that it didn't, as far as I'm aware, and again, it's very vague because all of the guidance for the Data Protection Act's now been replaced with the guidance for GDPR.
GDPR, yeah.
So it's quite difficult to look up what were the regulations.
Yeah,
because it's all been replaced. But as far as I can work out, GDPR has basically created a new Data Protection Act of 2018 in the UK.
Yeah, and it's pan-European, yeah.
And so we did have the Data Protection Act of 1998, and that's now 20 years down the line. It's changed into the Data Protection Act of 2018, and that effectively mirrors GDPR. As far as I can tell, and I'm not an expert on this in any stretch of the imagination, but I have been on the forums a fair bit, and by what I can tell from people who are experts who have tried to answer these questions, the DPA only applied to people who were genuinely gathering data to process it.
No, that applied to everybody.
Not from what I've seen. So you would only have to register.
No, I'm pretty sure of that because when that came in, I started handwriting invoices.
No,
it was only about electronic storage.
I checked this because someone said, "Oh, well, we've had these rules for the last 20 years," and it's like I'm pretty sure the rules were different for DPA. But again, it's so open to interpretation. But I'm fairly sure for DPA. So here we go. You don't need to register if you're using data purely for domestic or private purposes, or your business uses personal information. Hold on. Your business stores personal information for internal day-to-day business activities.
That's essentially the same thing in the GDPR.
No, GDPR doesn't. GDPR requires that you do all the GDPR stuff regardless. If you're storing personal data, even if it's for internal business activities, you still need to do it in a GDPR compliant form. So you still need to have a privacy policy. You still need to have data retention policies. You need to have all the GDPR stuff that sounds easy, but in reality, it's very complicated. Mm-hmm. Because, for example, you could have a customer who gets in touch by email. They send you a text. You know, over the course of of the lifetime communication with that customer, you could have communication all over the place. You could change email service providers. You could be using POP3 where your email's downloaded onto your computer, which is what I do because I want my business email to be in my house. I don't want my business email to be on the cloud. And that's a current experiment that I'm running at the moment.
You might want to change that.
Well, there's pros and cons going down either route because all you're doing is farming off that responsibility to someone else's privacy policy. And whether or not...
And there's all kinds of things I don't trust Google on, but I trust them to put a privacy policy in place that's GDPR compliant if they have to.
Yeah. But then to fully understand whether or not you're compliant, you would have to have a full understanding of Google's compliance.
No.
So you'd have to understand what their data retention policies are, etc., etc. It gets complicated.
I think you're making it more complicated than it needs to be. I've opted for the simpler option. The privacy policy includes wording that either means that you as an individual can ask to have your data removed, or that I keep it until such time that I feel it's not useful anymore. I think that's enough.
From what I've read and from what a lot of the experts are saying, you've got to be specific on the timeframes.
No, you don't.
So this is what people who do this job for corporations are saying. But they're saying that, they're trained in this. They've had to go through this to make their corporate compliant. And you've got to put timeframes in place, apparently. So you've got to say, I'm going to keep, for example, I'm going to keep data for a year or whatever. Now, don't get us wrong. If it's for tax purposes or whatever, then that overrides all of it. So that's fine. So if you need to keep your tax records for 7 years in your country,
as we do, yeah.
And this is another thing that I don't understand about GDPR. I'm a little bit confused about how we can have a ruling come in that affects every country in the world. And I don't fully, do you understand how one country can enforce a law on another country and what happens if that country just ignores it?
I don't know what happens if another country ignores it. I presume they can levy fines, but it is a pan-European ruling in agreement with all the EU countries that affects all EU citizens. So if you have any kind of trading arrangement with any EU citizen, it affects you.
I've always wondered how can they even enforce it on other countries. But anyway, if you're selling product to anyone in the EU, you need to be GDPR compliant. You need to have your privacy policies, you need to have your data retention policies, you need to have policies for subject access requests, and if people are asking for a copy of their data. I mean, the retention policies themselves can get very complicated. And I appreciate for your average, and what most experts are saying is don't worry about it. For a one-man band, they're not going to bother chasing you. But that's not really my point. My point is that you've got a lot of businesses out there who want to be compliant, and they don't know what they need to do to be compliant. And the fact that we can't even agree what you have to do, and we've looked into it.
Yeah, sure.
And you're saying you don't need to put a specific time frame in place for the retention of data, and I'm saying I think you do. So we've clearly read two different things. The ICO website, by the way, is useless. It doesn't tell you. It just gives very, very vague terms to kind of describe. But then I've heard a lot of people saying, the ICO are massively short-staffed. They're only going to be chasing after the real big players. And it's like, yeah, I totally get that. But that's not an excuse for putting a law in place that scares the bejeebers out of small businesses, because there's a whole lot. I've been reading thousands and thousands of comments from small businesses saying they feel completely deflated. They don't know what they have to do. They've looked into it, and now they're just feeling like they can't operate legally anymore. And there's a lot of companies out there saying that they're either they're not aware of it, or they're turning a blind eye and just hoping for the best, or they're doing their best to get compliant, but they just generally they just don't know what they have to do to be compliant. Take the data retention thing to another level. What about backups? So, say for example, I have all my data stored on my computer, including customer information, and I say I'm going to keep that for a year. Other than stuff that I need for tax purposes. But I'm talking about, okay, maybe I've got customer inquiries that include people sending me their personal information for a quote, and then the quote hasn't happened, but that personal information is still sitting on my computer.
Yep.
Going through that in a granular way to say, I need to work out what data I've had for a year for each customer relating to whatever communication, that's not an easy thing. Just in that respect, that's not an easy thing to sort out. And then there's like paper-based communications, and it can overlap into things like even social media to a degree. What if customers send you information via Instagram? I've had customers send me all sorts of personal stuff via an Instagram private message or a Twitter private message and stuff. So what do you do with that personal information? It's sitting there in my Instagram account. I'm assuming that would be covered by Instagram's privacy policy, but I'm not 100%. But as I say, data backup. So I've backed up my computer. I've deleted all the personal information, and I've been a good boy. I've ticked all the boxes. I've deleted all the information off my computer that's over a year old. But it's still sitting on a hard drive on backup. So I haven't really deleted it. And then people are saying, "Oh, well,
in theory, if you got your house broken into and that hard drive got stolen, and somebody had access to it, then in theory they could get personal information."
Yeah, exactly. And people are saying, "Oh no, backups are a separate thing because it's part of your IT systems." And it's like, rubbish, is it? It's just on a different hard drive. Even if you're using backups in the cloud, I would argue that gets even more complicated when you're getting into online backups that have potentially, very, very granular data retention, where you can start storing versions of files. You can start, every time a file changes, it'll just save like the block changes to that file.
Yeah.
And things can start to get really complicated when it comes to retention of online backups. So I'm well aware that I'm overthinking it, but there's a lot of businesses out there who just want some simple guidance as to what they have to do.
Yeah.
And at the moment, I haven't found any. I've read every guide I can find, going maybe 20 or 30 deep into links on Google when I'm just searching for sole trader and GDPR. And I've gone into everything in as much detail as anyone ever would who's a sole trader. Because I'm trying to work out, what do I have to do for podcast? People send us personal information all the time.
Yeah, sure.
So do we need a privacy policy for the podcast? Because people send us...
Yeah, sure. I've got a good one you can use. It's really easy.
So again, and we're going to have to define how long are we going to keep emails from people when...
Again, see, I don't think we do, but there we are.
Well, yeah, and this is the interpretation side of it. But it's only been a week since the policy went live.
Yeah.
It's interesting as well. A lot of people are saying, "Oh, why are all the big businesses sending out these emails 2 days before GDPR Day when they've had 2 years to sort it out?" It's like, yeah, they've had 2 years to sort it out, but they've been waiting on guidance to come out to tell them what they have to do to be compliant. And that guidance has just never materialized. So
yeah, and there's some quite big organizations in the US that have just, shut their doors to the EU, basically. If you can't get onto the LA Times website.
Yeah.
Just doesn't, it's not visible. They're just, rather than try and deal with it at the moment, they've just shut it down. Other outfits have actually reworked a completely separate website.
Yeah.
Purely for the EU visitors. And it turns out they work much, much faster. Like, pages load in a couple of seconds instead of 20.
Again, and I've read that where people are saying, "Oh, it's much, much better." And it's like, yeah, that's only a very, very temporary effect because they've switched off all the geo-targeted ads on these websites. Well, guess what, folks? You're going to get the ads back, but they're just not going to be targeted to you anymore. Yeah. They're going to be massively generic ads because you're not allowing any targeting information to be used to tell people where you are in the world, or I don't know what other stuff that they use for the geo-targeting of ads. I know it can get very scary as to with the way AdSense works, and suddenly you're getting adverts for things that you've only thought about and you haven't even searched for. But the flip side is that you're just going to get really generic ads that are almost completely meaningless to you. You're not going to get away from the ads because that's what funds these sites. They don't make these sites for no reason. They've got staff to pay and they've got,
Yeah.
So they will work ways around it. And it's a very temporary effect that you've got all these websites that are suddenly running much quicker because they've had to knock them up without all this stuff in the background. But it's very interesting to kind of watch from the sidelines. And I know people in government organisations who have said, and obviously I can't say what organisations these are, who have said that they are saying they're compliant. In reality, there is no way in a million years they are compliant, and there's no way in a million years they ever will be compliant, because their systems are so intertwined. You know, you've got personal data getting shot off all over the shop internally in these big organisations. Some of them are on old legacy systems that aren't supported anymore, you know, ancient databases that came around before email was even a popular thing. And yes, you can argue, well, that's really bad and that all needs to be sorted out. And it's like, yeah, it probably does need to be sorted out, but it ain't going to happen anytime soon. And you'll probably find that if a company puts that much, you know, okay, for government organisations alone, let's raise all taxes by 5% to pay for GDPR to be compliant within government organisations. I can't see that being a particularly
That's a vote winner, isn't it?
Popular route to go down. So you've got these departments that are massively underfunded anyway, which is why they're running on all these rubbish legacy systems. And they just can't make them compliant. They can't tick the boxes for your data retention and your subject access requests and asking for all data to the right to be forgotten. In practice, it's too complicated. But for corporations, I'm less bothered. I just think that ICO desperately need to put out some very, very clear guidance for sole traders, because at the minute, sole traders are terrified about the fines that the ICO have made very, very clear. They've made those points pretty clear about how much a company can get fined, which I believe is up to 20 million euros or 4% of turnover.
I'll take the 4% of turnover, thanks. It's going to be about 50 quid. You know?
Yeah. So again, you know, they've put these things out there that just scare the bejeebers out of small businesses. And that's my fundamental problem with it. I don't have a problem with the law.
Yes, I agree. It's a bit of an unholy mess. There is no guidance that seems to be worth a damn from the powers that be for the likes of us. So we've got to do what we do, and we have to make it up as we go along and do our best in the hope that we're compliant. It's not an ideal situation. And of course, everybody will have their own interpretation of what's acceptable and what isn't. I think, to the best of my knowledge, what I've done is acceptable based on what I've read. So we'll see when the ICO come knocking. I'm
not going to say they never will, but the likelihood is they never will. And I'm not worrying about it. It just annoys me when
it's one more thing amongst everything else that you have to consider, which is a pain in the neck. And, you know, it's of absolutely no benefit to us in terms of running our businesses. Let's be honest, it's of no benefit to our customers in terms of running, in terms of using us as carpenters and cabinet makers or joiners. And before all this nonsense happened, if any of our customers said, look, I don't want you to hold my details anymore, we'd have said, of course, we'll delete them. No problem. Get rid of that.
Yeah, exactly. It's kind of a common sense approach to things, and things were fine. I mean, for example, if I get in touch with my window cleaner and send them an email, because I can.
A window cleaner with email, that's impressive.
I know. Yeah.
Ours is all on text.
Yeah. But if I send them, and text would have to be GDPR compliant, I'm assuming. I'm not sure. There's another one. But if I send an email to my window cleaner checking something and it's got my name and phone number on, well, there's personal information. Straight away, they're holding an email with personal information on. They have to have the GDPR policies in place. But I'm happy to take that risk. I don't care that my window cleaner holds an email about me with my name and phone number in. That I'm taking that risk. I'm not expecting that he's doing anything fancy with that data.
Yeah. Well, but then this kind of nonsense happens all the time where people kind of selectively ignore the bits of law that doesn't really apply to them. For example, as I'm sure you're aware, it's against all British health and safety regulations to work off a ladder. Ladders are for access only. Now, how many window cleaners do you see carrying scaffold towers around them with them?
Yeah.
Absolutely zero. They work off ladders because that's what they have to do. I'm not aware of any window cleaners being sued for non-compliance of health and safety regulations by working off a ladder. It's just nonsense by and large. As far as I am aware, I'm compliant with GDPR, and it's not keeping me awake at night. By the way,
time will tell. I think there's going to be some. It's very, very early days, and I think there's going to be some very interesting backlash out of this when more and more companies realise that they just can't be compliant. It's a lovely thought, but I think more and more companies are just going to realise that it's too complicated, and people can say, oh no, it's dead easy, and for big corporations, all you need is SharePoint, or, all you need to do is put in the system, and it's like, yeah.
All you need to do is employ a compliance officer
or a consultant
with 3 legal degrees.
And this is the fundamental thing. The law is so open to interpretation. It'll ultimately come down to who has the best solicitor and who wants to pay the most money on legal fees to fight whatever fine they're getting from whichever ICO happens to be levying that fine on them. And again, I find that frustrating as well. It's the only people who are going to win out of this is legal teams. They're the people who are going to make huge amounts of money out of GDPR.
There we are. Well, that's a good show. Thanks. Yeah.
It would be interesting to hear your experiences out there across the world of how you've been impacted by GDPR.
Maybe don't email us. Maybe put your comments in the comments on YouTube or something, so we can access them easily without storing them.
I'm not sure how you can get in touch anymore.
Yeah, just shout loudly. We'll hear.
Yeah, I guess we'll think about what we're going to do for our show email address. But in the meantime, it's contact@measuringuppodcast.com. And let us know what experiences you've had, and please contradict everything I've said. I would love to, but back it up with some evidence.
Yeah, with some solid links would be good if you can share them, of course. So yes. Anyway, okay. GDPR done and dusted
for this week.
I felt it was something we needed to talk about.
It's such a boring subject as well.
If anybody's still with us, thank you for that.
Let's talk about
something else.
Wood. MDF.
Okay.
What MDF do you use?
I use almost exclusively MR, moisture-resistant MDF.
Do you go for a brand or
whatever my yard has in stock? It's usually Medite. Occasionally you get Caber, I think it is, but it's usually Medite.
Right. Okay.
Yes, I've had a few questions about, why do you use MDF, why not plywood? 98% of what I do has a painted finish. So it's just more effort, more work to get a good painted finish on plywood than it is in MDF. MDF is a fantastic board. It's clear, it's clean, it's flat, it's stable. There's no knots, there's no splinters. It cuts well, machines well. It's stable, takes paint well. What's not to like, other than the dust?
There's a lot of MDF hate out there.
Yeah, mostly by people who've never used it or who've never had access to the decent stuff. They buy a sheet of fluffy, non-moisture resistant MDF from whatever bargain basement builder's yard they find for 15 quid or something. And it's there's a world of difference, as you know, Andy, between that, between one of the branded, quality pieces of MDF. I need to do a video about this, actually. I keep meaning to. But it would involve going somewhere to buy a sheet of crappy MDF to work with, and I haven't had time.
The variation between suppliers can be huge. My timber yard, they can get the Medite. But the normal stuff that they supply is great quality, so I don't have a problem with it. I think that's the thing. It's finding an MDF that you're happy working with and you're comfortable with what it's going to do under particular situations. Because I've had MR MDF, some unbranded MR MDF, where the grain raises more than the non-MR MDF. You know how you can get the grain weird. Raising on it.
Yeah.
And it's just bizarre, and it's one of those things that presumably it's just something to do with the manufacturing process of it.
My yard tends to get Medite pretty much exclusively, so I don't have that much experience with other brands other than the Caber. The only difference I've seen is with the MR MDF. Obviously, it's got a green tint to it, and I think with the Caber, it's sometimes solid green, especially on the thinner thicknesses, if you see what I mean. So 6mm and 12mm would be solid green all the way through. Whereas with the Medite, it tends to have just a green core to it. But you know, it machines the same as far as I can tell.
And I've had MR boards that aren't green at all. By the way, I don't know if you've come across that.
No, never. It usually is because it's color coded for
the walls of my workshop. Because I just happened to get some delivered from Wix for when I got my workshop. When I put the MDF on the workshop walls. And that is MR MDF. It still has the stickers on saying it's MR, and it ain't green.
Interesting.
So either they're telling porkies.
With the Wix, who knows? Yeah.
So I don't know what the green does. I don't know if that's just something so you can tell the difference.
I think it's just a visual, just a colour, just a visual dye. So they can, because you can also get, is it pink?
Yeah, I think so.
Fireproof.
And they're bringing out some really fancy ones now, like, formaldehyde-free ones. And
well, most of the formaldehyde in manufacturing of MDF, again, going from provided you stick with a decent brand, will be so minimal. You will. My wife works in the clothing industry, and it's not widely used in the UK and Europe. But it is still extensively used as a finishing agent abroad. So, a cheap shirt bought off a market stall, manufactured somewhere a long way away, you will likely get more formaldehyde off that, more exposure to formaldehyde from that than you will from any MDF.
Formaldehyde is used extensively in manufacturing.
Yep.
Everything you can probably look at where you're currently sitting has probably had formaldehyde involved in the production process at some point down the line. And I've had people saying, oh, you shouldn't be using MDF, use like plywood instead. And it's like, I hate to break it to you, but plywood probably has just as much, if not more.
What do you know about the glues and the resins bonding those plies together?
Yeah, it's all formaldehyde based. So, but your own body produces formaldehyde. It's a natural chemical, and it's naturally around us at all times anyway. I'm not professing to be any expert on formaldehyde, but there's a lot of panic out there about it. And the biggest thing with MDF is obviously the dust, and it's not a pleasant dust to be around.
No, all wood dust is hazardous, and MDF, you don't know, is medium density fiberboard. It's made by compressing dust, other fibers, and those fibers come from mostly hardwoods. It's the scrap, it's the waste from the hardwood manufacturing process, which is then compressed under a great load into flat, stable boards bonded together with resin. All wood dust is hazardous, and I still haven't got an air scrubber yet. Never mind. I'll get one soon.
That's the key thing, is that hardwood and softwood dust in the air, regardless of whether it's come from MDF, is not a good thing, and you need to protect yourself against that.
Yeah, MDF dust can be particularly fine, so the sub-third of a micron particle are the bits that aren't collected by HEPA vac type systems. So they are generally regarded as the very superfine particles that you've really got to watch out for. And of course, to guys like us who are exposed to it, who are using it all the time, then yes, we need to be particularly careful with it. For most people, cutting a sheet of MDF in your back garden with a circular saw, it's not going to make a scrap of difference to you, unless you're previously predisposed to breathing difficulties or those kind of respiratory problems.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's the thing, the vast majority of my customers are looking for a painted finish on what they are having installed. And just nothing out there takes paint better than MDF to have a smooth, clean, predictable finish.
Flat, smooth, clean board, which, you can get a really nice butted together joint, sand it, a little bit of filler on it, sand it again, and you can't see the join. It's there's no end grain to speak of in it, and it produces a very good finish, which is why it's been so popular, of course. Plus the cost of plywood as well, of course. Decent plywood is becoming increasingly expensive.
Yeah,
because apparently it doesn't grow on trees. So there's that.
Apparently not. And I can't remember if I mentioned it in a podcast before, but my local B&Q were doing really nice quality softwood ply, and it's random whether or not they get it in, but it's to the point that it was paint grade finish. You could literally paint it and it was as smooth as MDF.
Gosh.
The trouble is it was very random whether or not they were going to get that particular. Sometimes it was just a terrible kind of B, C finish on the boards, where the underside was full of knots and the top side was splintered, and you could clearly see the grain in it, and it just wasn't suitable for painting, basically.
Wasn't good enough, yeah.
But then they would randomly get this stuff in with, I don't know what the grades go up to, but you could pretty much say it, it's a double A finish on the top side. But it just depends, I guess, on what wholesaler or what manufacturer that they're using in the back end, and it's just what they happen to have by chance.
Yeah. Have you ever come across or used poplar plywood?
No, not poplar ply.
I've seen a few people use it. A friend of the show, Joey Chalk from King Post Timber Works, has done a few bits with it, and a couple of the guys on Twitter that I know who've used it. It's like birch ply, so 12 or 13 layers to it, but very light, so much lighter than regular plywood, really strong. Apparently gets used in the boating and caravanning interior fitting industries quite a lot. But it's quite soft. It marks quite easily. So apparently you can get birch-faced poplar ply. So the outer layers are birch, so that bit is tougher. It's something I want to have a play with. I've got to build when this monster job draws to a close. I've got another banquette to build, big, not as big, but biggish, with three separate boxes in it with sliding doors, and I might see if I can scare up a bit of poplar ply to try on that. It's supposed to be very nice, very very clear and clean of any voids on the edges. So a good quality board for not much more than the price of birch ply. So I'll have a play with that. If my yard can get hold of some for me.
I made that dressing table organizer thing for my wife. Mm-hmm. That's made out of tulip wood, which I believe is poplar.
Yeah, that's right.
And interestingly, I don't know what tulip wood or poplar is on the wood hardness scale, and how it compares to birch or whatever. But I found it very hard.
Really?
I found just drilling holes. I was, unless I had a really sharp drill bit, it was burning the wood, and
right.
It could have just been my drill bits to blame.
It could be. So where do you
the dewar sharpening?
Where do you get your timber from? You mentioned B&Q and Wicks, but I'm sure they're not your regular suppliers.
My main timber yard that I use is over by the coast.
Mm. You did a little video, didn't you? You did when you went out of
and they're about half an hour away, and generally I just get stuff delivered from them. And that works out really well, but sometimes I do need to, you run out and you have to pick some more up, and ideally you want to be using consistent wood throughout your project. So,
of course,
but I can't really move around 8x4 sheets on my trucks. So generally, I get them to cut them up either in. I can fit a 4x4 in the back.
Well, it's a 4x4 truck, isn't it?
Yeah.
Boom.
Or
I'm not going to get many straight lines like that one, am I? Let's be honest.
had to be done. Or I can run 1x8 all the way through the truck. So I can do an 8-foot board up to about 1 foot maximum, and I can run that all the way through the inside of the truck.
That's 2440 by 300 if you for the metric measurements among us.
Yes, exactly. And sorry, Windows 10 has suddenly decided it's going to update itself.
That's nice. Nice.
Okay.
Maybe a shorter podcast than normal.
We'll see if we get cut off. Then that'll be why. And but ideally, I try to get it from the timber yard. But sometimes, if I'm in a rush, Wix and B&Q and stuff are the only options, and they're literally 5 minutes down the road.
Yeah, sometimes it's the weekend or a Saturday or whatever, and you need to. You just need to get something, and it's I'm glad they're open, but they're not my normal port of call.
And as I say, the biggest problem that I have with them is that the quality can be very variable, just depending on, because I'm assuming they're just trying to source stuff from the cheapest supplier to make the best margin off it.
Yeah,
maybe it's a far more complicated process than that, but trying to get consistent quality from the big box shifters is tricky.
Yeah. So who's your timber yard then? Give them a shout out just in case people are interested.
It's Percy Hudson's in North Shields is the main one that I use, and there's also, I'll give a shout out as well, there's Key Timber in Byker.
Is it mostly sheet goods and redwood that you get, or do you get into hardwoods and stuff as well?
Sometimes get into hardwoods, and will pretty much source anything that you want, and they'll
but they don't stock it.
They'll stock a decent range of stuff, and it's generally stocked completely undressed. So it's literally rough sawn boards, and then you say what dimension, how you want it dimensioned, Interestingly, I had someone leave a comment on my YouTube channel about the one where I went to a timber yard saying, "Oh, why didn't you specify standard sizes of timber?" And it's like, well, because standard sizes of timber in the UK are going to be different to standard sizes of timber in the US and everywhere else in the world. And really, I didn't quite know how to answer that. Obviously you've got your softwoods, your 44 mil strips or your 34 mil square sections and your mouldings and all that sort of thing. But would you say the standard sizes for? I mean, obviously the standard sizes for sheet goods and stuff generally comes in 2.4 meter lengths. But even if I went down the hardwood routes, some timber yards will sell it by the meter. Some will do it by the length.
Interesting. It's from the little hardwood quantities that I've bought. If you buy, typically for the guys that I work with anyway, who are Ferguson's, AJ Ferguson's, just down the road from me. Great timber yard, been there for over 100 years, founded in 1914. Been in the same family since about the 1920s. So they're a good little yard. I'm so glad they're there, because I hate to think what that site would be worth if they turned it into flats with an absolute fortune. But they've really upped their game in the last couple of years. They've invested in a lot more machinery. I get they've got a little CNC machine there. They've got a really nice edge banding set up, and obviously they'll cut to size. They've got a big panel saw that costs more than my house probably. And they do a great range of redwood. They've started doing a bit more buildery stuff because they find they're getting guys in to get fence posts and sacks of cement or whatever. So they've got some of that stuff too. But they've also upped the range of the hardwoods that they have. So they have quite a lot of unfinished, like you say, undressed hardwoods, which tend to be sort of fairly generic. Oak and the other common ones, Meranti, a little bit of Sapele, that kind of stuff. And then they've started stocking dressed timber, so finished sizes. So they've got 4x1 and 2x1 American white oak, 3x3, 4x4. Again, they're in inch sizes because that's the size that they come in. But they're obviously dressed down to 75mm square or whatever else. So they do quite a wide range of that material, and that's sold by the length, whereas the undressed sawn boards are sold by the cubic meter. So it depends. You've got to work out, how much you want and what volume it will be. So it gets a bit complicated.
I think standard sizes exist to a degree, but I think it just comes from experience of, I'd design the project and then kind of say to my timber yard, this is what I want.
This is what I want. Yeah. Again, and if you're having stuff cut, why would you cut it to standard sizes? You're having it cut to the sizes you need for that particular project,
Yeah, exactly. For example, when I bought quite a big section of tulip wood for the project that I was building, and also just to have some in stock because I thought it was quite nice wood to have in. So I ordered about double the amount that I would need, so that I have some left over to use for other projects and stuff. Yeah. And again, they just said, well, what size do you want it to be? And it's like, I was like, well, what size does it come in? And it's like, what size do you want? And it kind of went backwards and forwards, and I think really, and eventually you might say, oh, well, I want a 5 foot wide solid slab of tulip wood. And it's like, well, you can't really do that. You're going to have to glue it up or whatever, So, but I think the key thing is just chat to your timber merchant and just ask them. They're more than helpful with that sort of stuff.
And there's a cost attached, of course. If you're buying undressed timber and you want it to be a specific size, then they've got to allow for wastage and all that sort of stuff to be sort of planed and trued up. Whereas if you are buying standard sizes, 6x1, 8x1 boards of redwood, then obviously it's run through a massive machine at a sawmill somewhere in huge quantities. That's why they become standard sizes. But certainly for sheet goods and that sort of thing, if you're having it cut, then why would you cut it to any size other than the ones you want?
Yeah, exactly. So chat to your timber merchants. They'll be more than happy to take your money.
Yeah, and again, I don't know about your guys, but mine are very happy to have, ordinary people, non-trade type people in. There's often a couple of people wandering about looking slightly lost, and the guys are there to help. They do a good job at sort of steering you through the buying process. They're not going to. They want the customer to go away happy and come back. They don't want to saddle you with a load of old rubbish that they can't shift.
Yeah, exactly.
So the more discerning tradesmen, they again, I've seen them do this, with people, and they've really sort of talked them through and helped them. With the buying process when people turn up who just don't really know what they need.
Yeah.
Always worth a chat to the guys in the high vis jackets who'll help you out.
And they do. Do you always do custom mouldings and stuff like that, or like?
Yeah, they've got quite a big range of spindle stuff. They can match pretty much anything you need.
Yeah, same here. They've got a big shaper machine, and they can pretty much any moulding you can possibly imagine. They've got the gear to make it, and they can probably do it cheaper, even if you want to have a bash at making the moulding yourself on your router table or whatever, they can probably supply it ready moulded cheaper than you can even buy the wood for in the first place from your box shifters. It's just not worth the effort, just go down to them with the profile and say, I need X amount of that, and they just sort it out for you, which is awesome.
Yeah, as I say, really, really appreciate the fact that these guys are still in business and that they haven't sort of sold the plot yet.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about yours, but mine they're always rammed.
Always
really busy.
Always busy, yeah.
Yeah, which is nice to see. So.
There's a few around, but they are a particularly good yard, my guys, and they are literally 5 minutes away, which is fantastic for me. So, yeah, good stuff. Following on from, potential customers wandering around a timber yard looking slightly lost, another topic I wanted to have a quick chat about was, that I've been thinking about as well, is who is your customer for your work and who's your audience for your YouTube? Because mine are quite different, quite separate.
Oh, mine are very, very different. And my customer for work is purely I operate generally for domestic work in Gosforth, hence my company is Gosforth Bespoke Joinery, and that's what I do. So I make custom built-ins and units and bits of furniture, and you use anything that people ask for. Really, you know, that is viable for a one-person joinery business to make, and that is generally, you know, within maximum 5 miles of where I'm based. I do very little outside that. I don't go, obviously, if you're not familiar, Newcastle is north of the River Tyne. You've then got Gateshead south of the River Tyne. Getting across the Tyne in rush hour, just, you know, forget about it. You know, add an hour onto your journey.
You've got 3 bridges, haven't you? What's the problem?
Of course, we've got about 15 bridges. You wouldn't believe the amount of bridges we've got, and tunnels. And it's at rush hour. It can be massively variable how long. So I just don't go south of the river at all. You know, it's.
I know. I can absolutely agree with that feeling. Different river, different south, but you know.
Yeah, the times I've done it and I've taken jobs on south of the river, it's added so much time onto my day. It's just, and I don't need it. I've got enough work just in my little bubble. And I'm quite happy with that, and I don't need to give myself an extra stress of driving further afield.
Do you find that you've been marketing yourself towards a particular type of customer, or is it just a particular type of customer that comes to you looking for something special?
I don't market myself very well at all. I knocked together a temporary placeholder website for my joinery business when I kind of refreshed my site a year or so ago. And I haven't had a chance to even update it beyond that, and
right.
My website's terrible. I'm not in. I don't even know where people get my number from, to be honest. I still get calls, and my number's not published anywhere.
Recommendations, personal recommendations.
Well, I can't complain. I do still get inquiries from back in the handyman days where I used to do a bit of everything. And I do have to try and explain to people that, you know, I don't really do that sort of work anymore. But I think we've talked about trying to keep regular customers happy, and sometimes you have no option but to do some of the other work. But it just becomes a bit of a distraction from the stuff that you want to do.
Absolutely. I've got somebody now who's I don't know them, but I was recommended to them, and they need a door. I don't know which door. I assume it's an outside door. Back door, front door, whatever, the door sill replaced.
Yeah.
And they've got a sticking window. And I think, you know, I just don't want to do it. I've told them I'm busy until later in the year, and they still keep coming, well, could you come and have a look and advise? And I thought, well, not really, to be honest. No, I mean, you know, it's not really what I do these days. And at some point you have to start saying no. I don't know who it was who recommended me, and I do appreciate the recommendations, but sometimes it's you've just got to say thank you, but I don't do that kind of work anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So market-wise, you know, I have a couple of pictures on my website of stuff that I make, but it's not up to date. The vast majority of alcoves and things that I've done on my website, which I need to sort out, but I just haven't had time. And but yeah, so I try and push the jobs that I want to do, which generally is, let's simplify matters, I like doing alcoves. You know, they tend to be quite good paying jobs. They're quite interesting to do. They're all different. They can all be different designs and styles. You don't run into too many nightmare situations with them, but as per the walls that you had on that job, you do get your fair share of challenges. But what about yourself? How do you market and target yourself for normal work?
A bit like yourself. I looked on my website recently, courtesy of the GDPR Fun and Games, which is the first time I'd looked at it in a few years, I've got to admit. And like yourself, a lot of the pictures that are on there are pretty old now. I've done an awful lot of work since then. And people either find me through the website, or almost everybody will have looked at the website to see the sort of thing that I do, which makes it a worthwhile, showcase, a worthwhile portfolio site. But mostly it's from personal recommendations. There's a thing, there's like an email list called Next Door, and I've been recommended on that a couple of times, where it's just a round robin sort of email list for the area that has 1,000 people on it or wherever. And somebody, do you know a carpenter who can do this, that, and the other? And somebody puts your name forward, and then you're fielding emails forevermore saying, no, I don't do that. But mostly it is recommendation, word of mouth, or repeat customers, people who've I've done work for before, who've come back, which is nice. On the domestic side, and then I've got a couple of interior designers that I do work for. Yeah. Which I tend to think of them as commercial work, even though what I do ends up in somebody's home because it's done through a designer. I feel it's kind of more commercial. And again, I don't generally have any involvement in they're mostly freestanding, and they are mostly painted by somebody else. So I'm just the trained monkey who can nail it all together in a reasonable fashion. So interesting in some ways. You get some quite interesting pieces, but slightly dissatisfactory in others because you never really get to see the finished article. But yeah, it's part of the business. But that's broadly it. Like yourself, my customers tend to be the kind of people who want something made. Well, I don't often get people trying to compare me to what they can get down at IKEA, although that does happen periodically. I thought it might be cheaper. No, it's not cheaper getting something made.
Yeah, it's like trying to explain to someone that when something's built by robots, it will be cheaper than something built by humans.
In vast quantities. That's right. So, but yes, mostly comfortably fixed clientele, let's say, who have an idea of what they want and are prepared to spend the money to get something fitted, to get something made, get something bespoke for them.
And it's for commercial work for myself, I cover a much wider area. I don't know about yourself. Do you push further afield for commercial stuff? Does there tend to be more money in it?
No, not really. The two interior designers that I work for are fairly local, actually. One very local, one a little bit further away. And the work goes worldwide. It is, it's shipped all over. But my point of contact is very local still. So,
well, when I say further afield, I mean maybe 10 miles outside my comfort bubble, as opposed to 5 miles.
Right. Okay.
So, commercial work just tends to be better paid. So sometimes the odd job will come in where it's worth travelling a bit further to do it, but I always find if I do go further afield, there's always something that I need my workshop for, and or I've left something in my workshop that I need, and I'm not kit out to be a mobile carpenter. I don't have a van with all my tools in it, all set up and racked up and ready to go. That I'm a 99% a workshop joiner. And then installing the thing that I've built, similar to yourself.
So if your clientele, probably a bit like mine, comfortably fixed, know what they want, prepared to have something made, who's your audience on YouTube then? Who do you pitch your YouTube channel to?
My YouTube channel is, my tagline of my YouTube channel is entertainment for makers. So my YouTube channel is aimed, and it's if you've not been on my channel, it's very wide-ranging stuff on it, because my whole purpose of my channel is just to give people something to watch, to have a break from, sometimes you can watch projects being made, but sometimes you just want to, I don't know, have a look at a new tool or a particular way of doing things, kind of similar to yourself to a degree. But I'm also going into things like how UK houses are made, and
I saw that. That was really interesting.
Yeah, which I still want to do I've got a lot more to do in that series of
yeah, it's easy. It's easy to start a series and for it to stall a bit, isn't it?
And suddenly you've got all these other projects, and it's like, oh well, I best get these ones out because I've filmed it all and it's fresh in my mind. And then suddenly it's 3 months down the line, and you haven't had a chance to film any more of the series that you'd started.
Yes,
I need to sort that out. So yeah, my channel is generally aimed at people who like making stuff and are just looking for something a bit different to watch on YouTube, and hopefully that's kind of the route. Like, I released a time-lapse video the other day and someone complained that I didn't include a voiceover to go with it to explain everything that I was doing, even though I said at the beginning of the time-lapse that my next 3 videos were going to be a voiceover explaining everything that I was going to be doing.
You tell him, you told him, and then you tell him again.
Yeah, so I'd already said, I'm going to talk all about this on my next 3 videos. This is just a time-lapse so you can see everything from beginning to end. And people still complain.
Wow.
So
yeah.
But that's purely, not all my videos have voiceovers on. And some of them will have voiceovers. Some of them will just be a time-lapse. Some of them will be nothing to do with woodworking. Like I did one of my son's radio-controlled plane the other day.
Yeah, I saw that.
And, so...
You need a longer lens.
I do, yeah. Unfortunately, I only had my mobile phone with us, and it was terrible quality. But well, what about your channel? How is yours targeted?
I started a bit like yourself. I started it because I felt I had something to say that wasn't being said. I didn't think there were again the makers on YouTube are overwhelmingly American, and we're different. We use different materials. We talk a different language. I had somebody email me this morning asking me why I didn't do rabbits on my
right
on my cabinets. And I think, well, first of all, he spelled it rabbit like a little fluffy bunny. It's got an E in it, and it's anyway. Long story. So there didn't seem to be very much for people making ordinary things. If you want to learn how to hand cut dovetails or do traditional joinery, there seem to be plenty of people pushing that kind of work, those sort of videos. But there didn't seem to be many people doing sort of regular work-a-day kind of stuff that I do for a living. And I thought that I was aiming it at beginners, and I think that's changed a little bit. I think, relative novices maybe, but people with a little bit of experience and a few tools. This struck me the other day. My son's just bought a flat where he lives, and he's doing a bit of work, and he was doing a bit of painting, and he's bought the paint, and he's bought the tray and the roller. He's had to buy everything because he doesn't have anything, and he didn't have anything to stir the paint with.
Right.
He said, "What do you use?" I said, "Well, I usually use a little bit of stick, a little bit of wood, which I've got, so many little bits and pieces." Of course, he didn't have anything like that, and ended up using a wooden spoon. So, I'm not going for dinner anytime soon. But of course, not everybody has access to all the stuff that we have, and I do try and make it. I've done it less so more recently. Try and say that obviously you don't have to use a domino machine for this. You can use a dowels or biscuits or whatever else to make the joints. There are other ways of doing the things that I'm doing. I'm just doing it because I do this for a living and it's quick and easy. But very much, towards relative novices was my who I expected my audience to be. It looks like there are guys with a bit more, quite a bit more experience watching as well. So
I view your channel as quite higher end, to be honest. Well,
really, gold.
Put it this way, I can't think of any other UK channel off the top of my head that has gone into, for example, making panel doors properly. Well,
that was one of the reasons I did it. It was, in fact, that was my first video, if you don't know.
I didn't know that was your first ever video, actually.
I'd done a couple before on something else, and I got 40 subscribers, then waited 6 months before putting another video, and then 6 months again, and I started doing the panel doors. Panel doors was the first one I did as part of this, year-long experiment, which has gone on a bit. So yes, that was the first proper one. And to be honest, I started off just taking pictures. I was a bit more active on a forum back then, and somebody was asking about an easy way to make doors, and it was hard to explain, so I was just explaining the loose tenon thing. And I started doing it with pictures, because I used to be a photographer. And then I thought, you know what, this would be so much easier if I made a video. So I just shot the video on my phone and slapped it together, put it on YouTube, and the rest is history, as they say.
And here we are.
And here we are, 18 months later. Who'd have thunk it? Yeah, I still tend to think of my audience as being relative novices, but yeah, as you say, I think there's a few people with a fair few more tools and ideas watching than I certainly expected.
I enjoyed your MFT video as well, and the follow-up. I've got so much YouTube to catch up on after being away.
Ah, good. Yeah, just for you, Andy. Just for you. Yeah, this is the trouble, and podcasts as well. I know when the weather's nice like it is now, there are so many other things you can be doing. We keep up with as many as we can, and there's a ton of great content on YouTube and in podcasting, and obviously we appreciate anybody taking the time to listen to ours or watch ours. So yeah, all good stuff.
Yeah, and thanks again to we've had a good few more Patreon pledges through as well. Thank you so much for that. That helps us keep the lights on the podcast.
Very much so.
Awesome stuff. What have you been listening to? Anything new or watching anything new?
I discovered, and I didn't know this at all. I haven't watched much at all because, again, my just catching up on other stuff. But a friend of the show, Joey Chalk from King Post Timberworks, has a podcast. I hadn't realised this. Sorry about that, Joey. Called the Shop Stool Podcast. He co-hosts with two other guys, Robin Lewis and Jordan Crawford. One is a South African living in Australia. One's an Australian living in Australia, and Joey Chalk, of course, is from New Zealand. So they talk about it, kind of similar to this. Really, they've covered similar topics to what we have, and it's very interesting because obviously they come from an Antipodean perspective. They have an amazing range of timbers to choose from down there, far more than we do, but again, they have other challenges. The weather is pretty crazy by all accounts. The ranges of weather conditions that they get is pretty extraordinary. So yeah, well worth a listen. Out every week, and I think they're up to about 30 episodes or so now. So yeah, the Shop Stool Podcast.
Interesting. I shall subscribe to that. I'll add it onto my list. I've been, how I was catching up on the Hello Internet podcast, and I finally managed to get up to date on it. I think they're up to about episode 103 now or something, so I had quite a big back catalogue to go through. And it was one of those things with podcasts. If you're new to the podcast world, and you've only just dived in on this episode, I would suggest you go back to episode 1 and listen all the way through, because a lot of the stuff that we say will make a lot more sense if you've heard some of the older episodes that we've done. And this is one of the things with podcasts, is that often people will dive in on a later episode and then think, oh, I quite like that. And then you want to listen to back catalogue. And the trouble is with a big podcast like Hello Internet, and each of their shows is, 1 to 2 hours long, and you've got 100 to get through, it can take quite a long time.
Yeah, you're going to need a long flight to cover those, aren't you?
And I tend to, I burn through them in the workshop, depending on what I'm doing. But if you're doing a lot of cutting and stuff like that, you can't hear it. And then, but it's great if you're doing painting, because you can just kind of leave it on and zone out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I finally managed to get through that back catalogue. So I've got a bit of a sense of and as it happens, they're now starting to release their podcast more often as well, which before it was a very random release schedule that they had on that podcast.
Right.
And now they seem to be coming out a bit more frequently. But now I can actually listen to a lot of the other podcasts that I've not been listening to, because I've been trying to get through this back catalogue. So one of the ones that I've been listening to, it's a very old podcast, but it's called Hypercritical.
Oh, yeah.
With John Syracuse.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dan Benjamin.
I really miss Dan. The 5x5 network, great podcasting network. There were a few podcasts of his that I listened to, and he sort of seemed to lose all of them at the same time for various reasons. Hypercritical is great. It's not on anymore.
No, it stopped
finished
in December 2012, I think. So it's a bit out of date. It's very much into kind of tech and stuff. So you've got to you're listening to it thinking, but it's very interesting because they're talking about stuff that hasn't happened yet. And then...
Yeah, well, John Siracusa is the techie's techie, you know. He's
big style.
Yeah.
So it's a bit geeky, but very interesting because, as I say, you know, we're 6 years down the line, and a lot of the stuff that they're chatting about on that podcast is now a reality, and all the things that they're saying, like, you know, down to mobile tech and people not using computers as much and using laptops and mobile phones. And
absolutely.
And another one I've been listening to is Freakonomics Radio, which is a good one. You know, it's very much a kind of businessy podcast. There's a lot of interviews with top entrepreneurs, and you know, Richard Branson. Who else was on it? Mark Zuckerberg, I think, was getting interviewed on an episode. Jack Welch, that's a very interesting one. Jack Welch was CEO of General Electric. Fascinating story. And so I've been listening to some of them. There's but I'm now diving into all these other podcasts that I just haven't had a chance to listen to for
excellent
ages. I've got a couple of emails that have come through fairly recently. There's one, Christian from Estonia, who loves the podcast. So hello to Christian, or Christian. Anyway, and he has a 193 square foot workshop. And
what's that in meters, Andy?
He said he has actually specified it as 18 square meters, which is fantastic. He's done both.
Done a sterling job.
Otherwise, I wouldn't have had a clue. I don't know, 1,000 square meters. And then we've got a one from Des saying that he's currently listening to the Measuring Up podcast poolside at the Kempinski Hotel in Gozo near Malta.
We wish we were there.
And he says it sounds much better in the sunshine. But, you know, the sun's shining a little bit.
Sun's out down here. It's a bit hazy. It's still incredibly hot. So I'm going to have a very brief work day today, spraying something, then leaving, which is a bit of a drag. But there we are.
Yeah, I'm sanding and painting today. So I'm straight in the workshop after this. And I'm going to be editing the podcast in between coats of paint drying.
Lovely. Enjoy.
That's my day.
Quick shout out to a friend of the show, Keith Brown, Rag and Bone Brown. Keith hit 50,000 subscribers this week on his YouTube channel, so well done to Keith.
Yes, I noticed that. Congratulations, Keith. That's awesome work. 50k, that's a big one. You're so close to the 20, Peter.
It's like I said to Keith in his comments on Instagram, it's whenever you get a milestone, you know, everything goes into slow-mo. You claw your way towards that final sort of milestone, one fingernail at a time. So yeah, I'm about 150 or so short of the 20,000. It'll happen when it happens. You know?
Yes, exactly.
Pretty sanguine about it.
You can't predict these things. That's one thing I've learned.
You cannot. Good stuff. That's probably it, really, then, isn't it? Thank you so much for the pleasure of your company today. Appreciate you taking the time to listen to us. You can always contact us through Twitter on @MeasuringUpPC, or through Instagram @MeasuringUpPodcast, or through email contact@measuringuppodcast.com. You can reach me, Peter Millard, on Instagram at 10-Minute Workshop, or through YouTube, 10minuteworkshop.tv. Andy, you are Gosforth Handyman on Instagram?
Yep, Gosforth Handyman on Instagram, or Gosforth Andy on Twitter, or just search for Gosforth Handyman on YouTube, or the links are in the show notes anyway. So you'll find us all through that. As per usual, thanks everyone so much for your support, especially on Patreon. That makes a huge difference, even if it's only $1. Every penny counts on that. So thank you again to all of our Patreon supporters. We are forever in your debt.
Absolutely. We are, of course, Measuring Up Podcast on Patreon, and thank you so much for all your support there. As always, Andy, it's a pleasure talking to you today, and of course, a pleasure having the pleasure of your company to our listeners as well. That's it for this week, and I think we'll see you next time.
See you in 2 weeks.
Take care.
Bye.